So the third person on our panel is someone who's been there on the Hastings and Bexhill art scene for many years, Polly Gifford. I think I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, Polly, and explain why you're here.
Well, probably not an emerging artist.
No.
and not an artist, so I'm a producer, I would say now. I would call myself a creative producer. I work freelance now, but I've mainly been here in much more institutional roles, first here at the Delaware and then at Hastings Council for my sins. And so I think my career has been working with artists and looking for ways to create opportunity, either through directly producing events and commissioning and taking artists on that journey, to advice and guidance and looking to try and enable artists to do what they do. Most artists become self-producers, and the way you've both spoken, you become a self-producer because you have to, because there isn't enough resource around to have a producer working with you, even though you might love to have someone else doing some of that. And I think there comes I think the role of producer is one of those roles which no one really knows what they do, and yet every larger successful event will have producers at its core, be it producers overall, people like Tina who help put together jigsaw puzzles of funding and opportunity and partners and create these platforms that enable work to happen, or as a producer of a specific event. And I think I would have really wave a flag for producers and for people who aren't artists but are creative and have ideas. It's a really, really important role within sort of the ecology of arts and culture, to have producers who can navigate the systems, who know how to, be it finding funding, be it finding permission to do that thing which you want to do, be it knowing how to form partnerships and give artists the space to be artists.
So if you are, well, a young artist, an emerging artist, any artist in this town, what advice and tips would you recommend to them for them to catch the eye of someone like you or Tina in the first instance? You know, what guidelines for good creative practice in order to get commissions and opportunities to work on a larger scale? I think
one thing is think ahead, because
back to your list.
For any project of any scale that is going to require funding and partnerships, etc., it also takes time. Mm-hmm. So, you know, having a brilliant project idea in March that you want to produce in June, there's simply not going to be enough time. But starting conversations early, developing an understanding. I do an awful lot of fundraising, but I will only fundraise for things that I really believe in and understand the practice that's behind them. Mm-hmm. And that takes time. It takes time getting to know artists. It takes time thinking about where the right partnerships are, who's likely to support this, what kind of avenues might there be to make this happen, and that all takes a bit of time. So I think being involved, as you said, having those conversations, and then you have that sparky conversation that you think, oh, okay, we both see this in a similar way. Maybe we could work together on this, taking things to the producers of larger events. It's hard with, I think people often think, I've got a great idea, I'm going to come and talk to the Delaware or to Hastings Contemporary. And you should do that, but, you know, they work with really long lead times, and they actually have quite small programs, and they don't have a huge lot of capacity. There's a whole layer before you get to some of these larger institutions that, particularly if you're starting out, might be much more fruitful. And we're really lucky here that there is a really strong small and mid-scale, say really strong, there are small and mid-scale, there's galleries, there's smaller festivals. I produce a festival called Sanctuary Festival, which, you know, is a much smaller event than Coastal Currents, but when we do get funding and we do commission small bits of work with artists. So I think it's getting to know what's out there, talking to some of those small and mid-scale galleries about your ideas, rather than thinking, I've got an idea and I want to put it on in one of the big galleries, because I think you are going to get quite frustrated. But making things happen, there are ways to make things happen, particularly at the moment. There's a real shift towards things that relate to place, particularly within funding. So there is money around for things that are about place, and Hastings has such a strong sense of place, Hastings and Bexhill. This whole area, it's a really grassroots fed creative scene, rather than having, big benefactors or really big venues, particularly in Hastings. So there are ways of tapping into small amounts of money for ideas which really reflect the place that we're in, and I think that's what a lot of artists do naturally, because of the commitment everyone has to the scene here, and the time and effort people put into it, as we see each year through Coastal Currents. So allow time, engage and talk to people, ask for introductions, and I think invest in those ideas and trying to find the people to talk to.
I think maybe a good example is the Up in Arms exhibition that's here in the Warr Pavilion at the moment, which was Anna Maria's brainchild. But it took a long time for that to turn into the amazing exhibition that is now up there. And yeah, you do have to establish those relationships, have a vision, work on that vision, get funding in place, and then achieve it, which can sometimes be quite scary, especially when you are doing something for the first time. Am I right in saying that it's getting harder and harder to get Arts Council funding? And certainly a lot of the projects that I'm aware of in the town at the moment have got heritage lottery funding, and where you say kind of the importance of the historic background and place. And as an artist, I mean, would you encourage artists to do their own funding bids?
Yes, if you have the wherewithal to do that, because sometimes, again, that's the only way to break into that part of it. But the Arts Council is so oversubscribed that it absolutely shouldn't be where you think your main funding might come from. Do it, and there's Developing Your Creative Practice, which is the fund that is for individual artists, that is very much about practice-based rather than producing an outcome, which is more of the project grant. So do them, but always think actually of other places the money might come from. Heritage, health.
And often that would be working in partnership with a community group.
That is a very strong route to explore, are there community groups, be they voluntary or more established, who connect to the kind of ideas and the practice that you have. It's not right for every artist. But for many, particularly if you've got a socially engaged practice, there are groups that you can work in partnership with who can then make applications to some of these funds. And actually, I'd say that direct arts funding, is the almost not the last port of call, but it's not where I look first anymore. Even though I will do it, it's not where I look first, because it is so competitive and it can be really difficult to break into.
Yeah. And I can see, there's so much value that art brings to a place, and I think that's really apparent from how Hastings and St Leonard's and Bexhill are changing and have changed, certainly over the last 20 years that I've lived here. And the creative community is of such importance to these towns. And I think that there can be real joy in that collaboration with a community group who are there, and they have a mission, and they want people to pay attention to what they're doing and use their park or whatever it might be. And working with an artist can be a really good way of raising awareness of whatever that community project is about. And you're working and commissioning an artist, and it can work incredibly well. And I guess that's something that Tina looks at as well with Coastal Currents and how to fit that festival together and working. Again, it's working with partnership, and I think that's one of the things that we've talked about today, quite clearly, that there is that collaboration and wider community of artists, and maybe two artists working together or working with a community group. And
that has been one of the shifts in arts funding. Although, having just said, don't put all your eggs in an Arts Council basket, Arts Council funding has changed, and the emphasis has changed with this new strategy, which I won't bore you with, but there's now much more recognition of locally led, community-led work, including non-professional work, but partnership work between communities and artists is much more central to their plans and their aims than it used to be. So there is a doorway there that's much further open than it used to be. So it is certainly part of the picture.
I think, I mean, the very nature of art has changed, hasn't it? I mean, it's not so much about paintings on walls in galleries. You know, the concept of what art is much broader, and it's easier to work with community groups on it because you're expressing ideas rather than just painting a canvas, and I think that's quite exciting.
I think there's been a lot of shift between, you know, we keep on waving back and forward between the intrinsic and the instrumental nature of art. You know, does it always have to do something, or can it just exist for its own sake? And I don't think it is an either or.
No.
And actually, it's both. So you can do the work for its own value because that's what you believe in, but also find that work contributes to all sorts of other agendas, other values, other organisations' aims and objectives. So it is always thinking who you can connect with, who might have the same values as me, who might find these ideas exciting like I do, and looking for those partnerships in as broad a range of places as you can think of.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to ask you the question I've asked everyone else. On International Women's Day, what woman has been most impactful on your life, or a woman you'd like to dedicate the day to?
The first time I took on a leadership role in an organisation, so I was running a venue, and I was terrified. And I went to a talk by a woman called Ruth Mackenzie, who's a producer. She's done huge events from the Olympics and all sorts of other things. And she just looked at the room and said, if I don't wake up at least twice a week thinking, what the fuck am I doing, I'm not pushing myself enough. And that was exactly what I needed to hear, because I had spent the last few days waking up thinking, oh my God, what the fuck am I doing? And I still wake up sometimes thinking that, and that's okay. And in fact, that's a good thing, as long as I'm not thinking it every day. So I will tip my hat to Ruth Mackenzie for reminding me that even after 25 years of doing this, you still need to take those risks and to feel like you don't know what you're doing, when actually you probably do.
And I think that is really important for anyone at any stage in their practice. And I think earlier on, Kate, you were saying you were really nervous when we all thought we were going to be in the giant theatre, and even I was nervous about it. And one of the joys of getting older is you don't worry too much about it. You know? And I think that's really important. You have that nerves in the background, and then you just think, well, we're going to have to do it anyway. And you never quite know how it's going to turn out, but usually it turns out quite gloriously, and you know, that's really important. Yeah, so feel the fear and do it anyway.